Welcome back, honors. All right, so this is the second of the two flips that you'll be needing to do over Easter break. All right, so we are going to actually be covering now the lead up to the French Revolution. Right, we talked about some of the stuff in class on Wednesday. Ooh, my dates are all off now. On Wednesday, several of you weren't here because of the Latin trip. All right. I am going to be sending the link to this Prezi to everyone, including the flip on the Enlightenment that you need to get done, okay? And as well as this flip, so we can make sure that everybody is squared away and where they need to be. Deal? All right, so we are effectively going to officially, after this flip, have caught the CP kids. Y'all started 2,000 years before they did, had an entire extra unit on the front, and you caught them, and you're about to also pass them, right? So congratulations. Very good job, guys. Very, very proud of you. So let's get straight into it, shall we? Now, the French society under the Ancient Regime, all right? For those of you that were on the Latin trip, you need to go back and you need to get all the stuff that comes before this, before you write this down, or else it's going to make no sense. All right, so getting into it, though, the Ancient Regime, French society, extremely stupid, divided. Again, happy Easter, by the way. Ooh, man, sorry about that. Happy Easter. So, of course, really, really quick, in Easter practice, quick prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Bog Karoshi, Sovrimya. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Now, anyway, so, by the way, for any parents that are watching, I just said God is good and all the time in Russian. The kids know what's up. All right, so anyway, the third estate, though, is made up of everybody else, but particularly there are three types of everybody else, right? So the bourgeoisie, the rural peasants, the urban workers, right? So let's talk really quickly about these different types of people and delineate them from everybody else in French society, right? So the bourgeoisie are, oh my God, cross players. It is Easter. Leave me alone. All right, so anyway, the third estate is made up of three types of people: bourgeoisie, rural peasants, urban workers. Now, let's start with I'll tell you what we should do. I know they're in this order here, and you're more than happy to write them down. I personally am going to describe them, though, from biggest group to smallest group, all right? Because I think for honors kids, it makes a little more sense that way. So, first group, we got the most of them, right? The rural peasants, the bulk of the third estate. Those people are everyday countryside individuals. Farmers, tenant farmers, day laborers, serfs, some of them still, but they're your rural peasants. They live in the countryside. Because the bulk of your people in France do not live in urban areas, right? This is circa 1780. They're out in the middle of nowhere, all right? 1780, granted, they still had France had the biggest population in all Europe at 25 million people, all right? However, they weren't industrial yet. So Britain, by this point, is slowly chugging along, starting to get more industrialized, right, and doing their thing. But the rest of Europe ain't, all right? So they ain't there yet. So pre-industrial France is still very spread out and very rural, all right? So that's why the bulk of your people are rural peasants, right? So I hate that word, rural, because it's got too many R's in it. Now, then you got the second largest group. The urban workers, right? The urban workers are your poorest members of society, and they are the second largest group. They are the unemployed. They are the street vendors, printers. They're the people that work common day labor type jobs in the urban setting, right? They work in pre-industrial factories, making things by hand in very, very slow processes, but that is your urban worker, right? So then you've got your third group, the smallest out of all of them, but they have money. The bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie, also referred to as the bourgeois. I like saying bourgeois a little bit better because I think that little extra Z is like a little over top. Now, the bourgeoisie are prosperous bankers, merchants, lawyers, doctors, manufacturers. They are the growing class of wealthy, right? So they are, drum roll please, the middle class, right? They are the middle class. And there had never been a middle class until the Industrial Revolution, but the bourgeoisie is beating them to it even though the Industrial Revolution hasn't happened yet. What is this thing? That's gross. All right, it's like mushroom-based tea. I don't know, wife drinks. Gross. Now, anyway, but the bourgeois are very important. Because here's the thing. Like we talked about in class on Wednesday, the third estate's the only estate that pays taxes. So the bourgeois are very frustrated that all their hard work, intelligence, and going abouts in life are being taxed extremely heavily. I know a lot of parents right now, if you're watching this right now, you're like, oh, tell me about it, right? Trust me, New Jersey taxes, they're insane. I'm from being from North Carolina, they're crazy. Because here's the thing, the first and second estate pay almost no taxes. The third estate greatly dislikes the first and second estate because of this. The third estate is home to over 90% of the population and pays 97% of the taxes. That's insane. That doesn't even happen in our country anymore. 35% of all of our taxes are paid by the top 3% of the country, which is the way it should be in a little bit of a way, because it's like they have more money than they know what to do with. All right, so anyway, but third estate pays taxes on everything, from soap to salt, all right? The only tax the second estate pays is on land and salt, but then the third estate pays on everything, all right? It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And then this stuff starts happening, right? The Enlightenment comes around, which is what the flip that comes first is all about, right? The Enlightenment. By the way, you're going to have a quiz on the Enlightenment thinkers the day we get back from Easter. It's only 7 people. You'll be fine. It's a matching quiz. You'll be fine. Now, the Enlightenment thinkers believe in the following things: social equality, financial equality, power equality, right? You got thinkers like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I call him J.J. Rose. I think it's like his rap name. Denis Diderot, right? These people come up with the ideas that we don't need to be ruled by these snarky absolutists. No more Louis XIV. They propose different ideas under the British model, right? A parliament and a limited monarch. That's what the Enlightenment thinkers want. But most of Europe still doesn't have that yet, especially not France. France doesn't even have, write this down, France doesn't even have a constitution. So, of course, these Enlightenment ideas are very, very important, right? So, some of y'all are like, but wait a second, Mr. Terry, hold up. The nobles are the second estate. They're the only ones that would really be able to engage with these ideas. The first estate's the clergy. They don't really care about these ideas. So how are these ideas spreading to anybody? So, Dean D'Amato, maybe if you sat down and listened for a second, you might learn something. All right, so the way these the way these Enlightenment ideas spread is because they finally got a chance to eke into society via the new bourgeois, right? So the Enlightenment ideas were the inspiration for revolution, right? The Enlightenment comes first and inspires revolution because people began to meet in places like salons in wealthy people's houses and invite thinkers to discuss how the world could be fixed and better placed. So imagine this for a second. Imagine for a moment you've got two bourgeois or even noble, possibly, bourgeois or noble individuals. It's usually held by wives, so we'll go with, who do I want to use in this? The Jankos, right? The Jankos live in separate houses at this point, but the Jankos decide, we are going to hold a salon. And everybody's like, ooh, a salon? You mean we're going to get to come over and hang out and party and then listen to really smart people argue about stuff? And the Jankos are like, yeah. Actually, come to think of it, I think the Jankos would actually really enjoy going to a salon because you two are very, very intelligent. So, yeah, the salons would basically be wealthy individuals and wealthy families would invite these Enlightenment thinkers over to their homes and listen to them argue in front of their guests, right? Now, really, really quickly, though, who's moving around all these guests? Servants are. Servants belong to the urban working class, right? Servants belong to the urban working class. They're hearing these ideas as well. So by word of mouth, these ideas spread more like an infection. And ideas are more infectious than viruses, right? And then they begin to spread to coffee houses, which actually came before tea and like drinking of tea because coffee was easier to access because it was from North Africa, whereas tea was all the way from India, right? So coffee houses in England teemed with ideas about how monarchs abuse their power, and then these ideas are going to spread to France as well, and their coffee houses and cafes and things like that. Without the Enlightenment ideas, there would be no revolution, right? So the Enlightenment ideas eked their way into society via print and word of mouth, right? And began to inspire these concepts of revolution, right? Then, America, kind of did a thing, right? So then in 1776, the American Revolution breaks out. inspiring the French people to be like, wait a minute, you can do that? All right, so because here's the thing. The French people, ironically enough, the French government kind of shot themselves in the foot in a little bit of a way because Louis XV sent aid to the American Revolution, sent them soldiers, sent them money, sent them boats, sent them weapons, sent them all kinds of stuff, hoping to make money off of it in the long run and also to kind of just stick a finger in the nose of their biggest rival, England. And it inspired the French people that they can do this too. One particular guy, actually, really, really quickly, you know him. Everyone loves him. He's a good guy, the Marquis. Where is he at? The Marquis de Lafayette. Go. All right, so the Marquis de Lafayette, jot him down. The Marquis de Lafayette was actually a part of the Second Estate, but fought for the Americans as a general and as a military strategist, right? And so he actually was inspired by the American Revolution. Even a Second Estate member was like, this is wrong. It is wrong that we're listening to a monarch. It is wrong that we're listening to a person who has absolute and complete authority over all of us. We should revolt. We should be inspired to do this thing, right? Well, then the big tipping point comes. They got no money, all right? So financial troubles run rampant in all of France, right? So caused big and bad by this big concept called deficit spending, right? So deficit spending is when a government spends more money than it earns. And I know one of you right now is going like, it's like America. Like, we have debt and stuff. Have you seen the big counter? All right, well, first of all, just so you know, all right, just so you know, every single country has one of those clocks. So hypothetically speaking, if we all owe money to everybody, how is it possible that anybody could ever pay back anybody? It's a big scare tactic thing. Stop worrying about it so much. It's not even real. All right, so anyway, now, but deficit spending is when a government spends more money than it earns. All right, so national debt was at an all-time high because Louis XVI and his predecessors had begun to borrow money from other individuals to try and fight wars they couldn't afford, all right? Because of fighting other wars, helping the American Revolution, it's going to force the government to borrow money. 50% of the tax money that the French government was collecting was paying interest on those debts. That is insane, all right? So bad harvests also for 2 straight years are going to make food costs rise. When you have less food, the cost of it goes up, leaving the poor with less money to pay taxes with. So the First and Second Estate also still refused to pay taxes. There's actually a very famous meeting called the Assembly of Notables, right, where the king actually called all of these notable figures together. He was like, what if hypothetically the First and Second Estate paid taxes? And they were like, no, screw you! And they refused to do it. There's a very famous political cartoon of it where actually Louis is a wolf, and he's actually talking to these like birds, and he's like, what sauce would you like to be cooked in? And the birds are supposed to be like the First and Second Estate. So what ends up happening is Louis is sitting there, he's at his desk, and he just can't figure out what to do. Do not write the last 2 lines. They're not that important. Don't write the last 2 lines, write everything else. He's just sitting there, and his head's pounding, and he's like, what are we going to do? And his new financial advisor comes in. So this other guy he had was named Lamarck, Jean Lamarck, and that guy retires, right? That guy retires. He's like, I can't do this anymore. This is an unfixable situation. So they bring back this other guy they had for a long time, this Swiss financial advisor by the name of Jacques Necker, N-E-C-K-E-R, Necker. All right, so let me make sure you know how to spell this. Jacques Necker. So there he is. So Jacques Necker. All right, so he's a Swiss-born financial advisor, right? He's from Geneva. And so he actually comes back in and he says, sir, it's time. And Louis is like, it's time to do what? He's like, it's time to call the estates. Now, what the EstatesGeneral is, it's an emergency council, all right? The EstatesGeneral is a national emergency council. It is only called when it is absolutely necessary. If they don't feel it necessary to call the EstatesGeneral, then they don't call it, all right? So the EstatesGeneral is a national assembly where representatives from each estate are elected and represent each estate in a big legislative type house all about financial reform, all right? So Louis XVI, even before they actually showed up, had them all write complaints and notebooks and stuff like that, and but then they never read them. So he said, it's time to call it. Sir, you got to call it. And he's like, fine. And so he calls the Estates General, right? This is considered a big defeat because it hadn't been called in over 100 years, right? So it hadn't been called since before Louis XIV was in charge. That's insane. And then now Louis XVI's got to be the guy to do it, right? So they hold elections, right? They hold elections, and this is actually what it looks like when they actually call the thing, the Estates General. So when they call it, it's actually in this gigantic meeting hall, right? And it looks kind of, oh, this is my favorite picture of it. Come on. There we go. In this gigantic meeting hall, and that's Necker right there. There's Jacques, right, doing his thing. And then there's Louis XIV right there, or Louis XVI right there. And then, of course, there on this side is the Second Estate in their noble garb. And then over here is the First Estate in all of their Catholic garb. And then over here, you've got the Third Estate, right, in their black robes. Looking boring. Now, anyway, this is actually immediately after this thing happened called the hat fiasco. This is just to give you an inkling into what ended up happening, like going into the Estates General. It was very touch and go. It was not an easy, very, very clean event, right? It was very dicey. So the goals of the revolution, of course, are fairer tax laws for the Third Estate, right? So now the problem is, don't write this in right in here. Big problem going into it, though, is the voting principles are messed up. Just like the hat fiasco was a messed up event. So at the event, when they called the Estates General, it was a giant parade, like a borderline medieval parade, where the nobles were marched in with their bannerments behind them, and the Catholics were marched in front of this giant cross, and then here comes the Third Estate in their black robes, right? Like, oh, hey, we're going to fix things. And so the First Estate comes in through the front door, and then the Second Estate comes in through the other front door, and then the Third Estate has to come in through a back door, like with their heads down, like, oh, okay. Like they're not even there, right? There's a disgrace and slaps in the face going on. It's day one, right? And then Louis comes in and he sits down and he takes off his hat, right? So, and then the First Estate takes off their hat. And then the Second Estate takes off their hat. And then the Third Estate's begin to take off their hat and they're like, no! And they yell and freak out. And this is the whole thing called the hat fiasco. All right, so it's very, very touch and go, very, very dicey. And the other screwed up thing about it is each estate only got one vote. Nikki Del Rey, I know, is freaking out right now. Taylor, why is this messed up? Why is it messed up that each estate only gets one vote? Good job, Taylor. That's exactly right. Because the First and Second Estate are just going to gang up on the Third Estate every single time, right? So the Third Estate finally decides, like, there is no way that any of this is going to get done. And after months of debate, the Third Estate says, you know what? This is no longer about estates. Screw estates, all right? This is all about fixing France. So they recruit members, this goes in line with this, they recruit members of the First and Second Estate that are liberal-minded like they are, just like the Marquis de Lafayette. And they're like, we need to band together. No more Third Estate. We are now the National Assembly, right? So write that down and underline it, the National Assembly. And so what they do is they start meeting in their own room at the Estates General. They're like, we're the National Assembly. We're going to do our own thing. Shut up and leave us alone, right? So they start meeting in their own room. Now, Louis starts getting real tense about this whole thing. I'm going to say a lot of stuff that isn't going to be on the screen. You need to jot this stuff down, all right? The tennis court oath. Louis starts getting real nervous. He's like, ugh. What if they start freaking out? What if they start like getting too into this? What if they don't handle this appropriately? And so he decides to lock them out of their meeting hall, right? The National Assembly's walking up like, oh, hey, it's a good day at the shop. We're going to fix France. And then they can't get into their meeting hall. And so out of rage and fury, the National Assembly's like, you know what? Fine. We're going to go find somewhere else to meet. And when we get there, we're going to promise to one another that we're never going to disband until our demands are met. And so the National Assembly finds nothing but an open tennis court. All right. So now this, some people say, is where the revolution began, because an oath was taken between members of the First, Second, and Third Estate to band together and not disband until their demands of fairer government was realized, right? Now, as you can tell, this is a lot bigger and crazier looking than the signing of our Declaration of Independence, right? This thing looks like a rave. Like, you got the First Estate guy right here, Second Estate guy right here, or actually, no. It's First Estate guy right here, Second Estate guy right here, Third Estate guy right there. grasping each other and shaking hands, right? So trying to show the unification of the three estates, trying to actually show that they're going to like never disband, right? And this is, of course, from Jacques Louis David. And then you've got this guy over here freaking out, like dancing, and everybody's pointing at stuff, and everybody's flipping out and yelling and screaming. Yeah, it looks pretty intense. It looks like a rave, all right? So then, following this, the Parisians are going to do a thing that no one saw coming, all right? Because at the estates, things are getting bogged down, right? The Estates-General thing, nothing's getting done, all right? Nothing's really getting done anyway. And Louis is avoiding things. He's locking people out of meeting halls. He's being a total jerk, right? Sorry, I'm plugging my computer in. Oh, no! Old diffuser down. So, anyway, he's being a total jerk, right? Go back on there. Oh, so anyway, what ends up happening, though, is he begins to call in the military to try and prevent any violent action from occurring. Well, the regular people of France, the urban workers of France, are like, why is the military moving around? Isn't the Estates-General supposed to be fixing this whole thing? Are they about to kill all of us? And they start freaking out, right? Like, so the urban workers begin to flip out and riot under the watchful eye of the National Assembly, because rumors begin to swarm all over Paris that the military is going to arrest the National Assembly and disband the Estates-General, and it's just going to be more of the same, right? And so 800 members of the urban workers in the National Assembly, they assemble out front of this thing called the Bastille. Now, they had done some stuff before this. Usually a lot of history teachers will tell you, like, and then they randomly showed up outside of this prison, all right? So, like, that's not actually what happened, all right? So a lot of stuff had been going on before this, right? Like, for example, they had actually stormed an invalids hospital. Ironically enough, when they stormed that hospital, they found guns and they found like carts of bread, but they didn't have any gunpowder, right? And so when they assembled out front of the Bastille, it's considered a much bigger event simply because the Bastille is an image. The Bastille is a former medieval fort, all right? It was built in the Middle Ages. It was built as a Middle Ages as a stronghold for like incoming attacks against Paris, right? It's made of concrete. It's got battlements. It's meant to be a strong defense of the monarchy, right? And so, but the Parisians know that, all right, I have these guns and bread from this invalid hospital that I just stormed. I need gunpowder. I know they have some in the Bastille, and so they assemble out front of the Bastille. And the storming of the Bastille is considered a bigger and more egregious event in the eyes of the historical community because not only did they break into this thing, they burned it to the ground because they stormed the Bastille looking for weapons, all right? And by taking down this image of the monarchy and by destroying this image of the king and his big, staunch, you begin the revolution. The violent phase of the revolution has officially began because the Bastille was stormed and they were looking for weapons, right? They were looking specifically for gunpowder. Actually, when the entire thing would be before it even started, right? So before it even started, the warden to the Bastille, because it was converted into a prison, right? And so it only held like a few prisoners, but we'll get there in a minute. It had been converted into a prison, and the warden for the prison came out and was like, guys, calm down. Let's talk this out. And he said something that made the crowd angry, and the angry crowd then killed him and his assistant and put their heads on sticks and then ran into the first wall of the Bastille, right? And then the Swiss guardsmen that were in the battlements up top began to open fire on the crowd. And the crowd starts trying to pull this drawbridge down to get in. And the drawbridge finally comes down and it kills two of the storming members of storm members of the National Assembly under the drawbridge. Wouldn't that be a terrible way to go? Like on your tombstone it says like, great father and teacher killed by drawbridge, all right? So, and they get inside and they kill a bunch of the Swiss Guards members, right? And they start getting all of this gunpowder in these giant barrels of gunpowder. And then they were like, you know what? Let's release the prisoners. There's only 7 of them. 4 of them were criminally insane. So they just kind of walked around. And then they burnt it to the ground. Now, but the storming of the Bastille now shows that Paris, write this down, Paris is now controlled by the National Assembly. The king no longer has his involvement. Maybe if he lived there, it would be one thing, but he doesn't. And following this, there was a very famous quote when the Bastille was stormed. Louis XVI asked Jacques Necker, are we at war? And Jacques said, no, sir. It's a revolution. And the revolution of France began on July 14th, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille. And they celebrate this day every day, right? in Paris as Bastille Day, right? So this is just a monumental event because now, for the first time in all of history, the people of a country. I know some of y'all are saying America's a little bit different though because they didn't have as big of a population. They weren't really like developed yet, right? So we won because we knew our home turf and some Brits tried to mess around on it and we smacked them around a little bit. But the French, on the other hand, it's a big deal because now the people of an established country, of the most populated country, and of one of the wealthier countries in all of Europe, is deciding within their own hands how to change their government, right? And so we will now talk about the rest of this stuff on Monday when we get back. Enlightenment quiz when we get back. I know this was a long flip, but I get very excited about the French Revolution, but I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Happy Easter.